Lads, lasses, and the rest of the masses, welcome back to the channel. I'm Mono from Mono TFC, and welcome to another tactical breakdown. Okay, so here we have the 4-3-3 and the players that were in it. We saw multiple different setups with multiple different personnel, and I wanted to highlight them, show what the benefits of them were, and ultimately shed some light into Enzo Maresca's thinking and some of his decisions and why they worked, and some of the decisions on why they didn't work. Now, the system that we started with was slightly different to what we have been doing. Instead of this 3 centre-backs and 1 full-back setup we've been doing, we actually play with a pretty normal back 4 with the 2 full-backs and 2 centre-backs. Obviously with Reece James's exclusion from the side, kind of forcing Enzo's hand in this regard and kind of pushing him to make this decision. Now, Marc Cucurella came into the first 11, which we haven't seen yet so far, and it seemed like the obvious thing to do was to invert him into the centre, as he's done this before and has played here very comfortably, and obviously this gives us a very good balance with a left footer on the left side and then a right footer on the right side with Lavia. Obviously this would push Malo Gusto into this right centre-back role that James has been playing for the majority of pre-season, but perhaps because of a fear that he couldn't play this role, Enzo Maresca opted to do something a little bit different in this first half. Now, instead of us playing this way, like we kind of expected, we actually moved into another back 3, but a slightly different back 3. So what did he do? Did he invert the right fullback? Well, yes and no. Gusto was the fullback that changed position, but not in the way that we expected. Now, usually we see the right centre-back come into, or the right back rather, come into this area. We actually saw our midfield completely shift around, and instead, we saw Cucurella go out onto this left centre-back role, which he has played in the past, especially for Brighton. He used to play here, with Wesley Fofana coming out into the right centre-back role, where he's very more comfortable, and Levi Colwill coming into the central position, which I personally think is a better position for him than being stuck out wide, where he can actually defend better. Now, as I mentioned, this made the midfield shift around a lot, and as I mentioned in my last match preview, we had the option of swapping Kieran Dewsbury-Hall and Enzo around so they could both play like inwards, and we actually saw that happen. Instead of this setup which we've kind of been alluding to for the majority of preseason, we actually saw these two switch around, so Kieran can play this way, Enzo can play this way, etc. But that also kind of makes this next change more interesting, because we see Gusto come into this more right centre mid position with Lavia dropping deeper, and then Enzo dropping into this left centre mid position, and Kieran Dewsbury-Hall almost moves into a central 10 position here, where he is able to roam across the front line. And this is something that I personally kind of alluded to that we could do, obviously not with Kieran Dewsbury-Hall here, but I alluded to the fact that we could play a 45-degree shifted box midfield. So instead of the box midfield, we're actually playing a diamond instead. And I did kind of mention that this is something we could do, and I'm kind of glad that we get to see it, because this does offer us a bit more balance. Specifically in the way that we build out from the back, but also in the way that our midfield builds from the middle third into the final third. And this change makes the formation take a bit of a different form. Instead of a 4-3-3 or a narrow 3-4-3, we've shifted into a wider 3-3-4 during the build-up. Now, the main benefit of this change is that it allows our centre-backs, say Colwill, who's on the ball here, to have 3 options to pass to when we are trying to escape the press or play out from the back, instead of the 2 that we usually have with Lavia and Gusto obviously playing as these 2 centre mids. Now we have 3 with Enzo dropping a bit deeper. And it allowed one player in particular to really shine in this game, a player that I've been constantly trying to convince people can play as an 8 and not just a deep lying playmaker or a 5, and that's Enzo Fernandez. I think a lot of people got fooled by Pochettino's Chelsea into thinking that Enzo cannot play in an 8 position and cannot play in an advanced position, but that could not be further from the truth. Enzo is fantastic further forward when he's got men in front of him and he can use his elite progressive passing to unlock defences. Pochettino's system never really allowed him to do this, and he was pushed into this inside 10 position and tasked with being up against centre-backs, with Caicedo and Gallagher playing the passes behind him, and that doesn't really suit him. This position is different because it allows Enzo to drop deeper in build-up and help us play out from the back, as many have pointed out is one of his strengths, but also allows him to get further up the pitch and dictate play further up too, as evidenced by the good chance he created for Guiu in the first half from this type of position. Of course, this also helps Malo Gusto, who, despite being an excellent defensive player, I think would be wasted in a reserved role, and really thrived playing in this position where he can not only get back and defend, but also advance up the pitch and be able to under or overlap on that right hand side like we know he can do well. And this change is also a positive for a man that didn't even play, Reece James. With Gusto performing so well here, it suggests that we could also do the same with our club captain, a player that, with no disrespect to Gusto, is a much better creator in the final third. Now let's talk about us a little in that final third, because we did change things ever so slightly once we were there. The central players helped our wingers retain their width, and with Mudryk, obviously, and Madueke pushing really wide and sticking close to the touchline, and it helped us form these little triangles which we can kind of play through. On the right hand side, this was the combination of Noni, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall and Gusto who would create this triangle here, and on the left we saw a little bit of the opposite. Obviously we had Misha, Enzo and Cucurella who would come up here and form this triangle. Obviously when we did this, Colwill would shift over to the left, Fofana would play as this right centre back, and then Lavia would be the other man back, and we'd push really high up to the halfway line. The interesting thing of note here was that Cucurella was given the license to get forward from his left centre back position, at times getting higher than Enzo, who would drop deep to collect the ball and play forward, or rotating with Mudryk to provide width and allowing the Ukrainian to drift inside instead, and obviously Cucurella would take the wide position and Mudryk could drive forward this way. And though for large periods of the game we found it difficult to break through the very low block that Inter brought to the game, which I think personally is a bit of a compliment to us considering how defensive they played, we created a lot of chances from these triangle combinations, with our wingers trying to drive us into the box and put crosses into the box from the wide areas, for example, with Enzo and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall trying to play make from outside the box, and Gusto and Cucurella able to get involved too. There is a glaring issue with this though, and something that Inter were able to punish us for. This leaves us very exposed on the counter-attack, only having the two centre-backs and Lavia to defend those transitions. Obviously, Cucurella and Gusto would get back, but it would take them a bit more time to do so, and if Inter were able to break quickly, like they did for Thuram's goal, then we weren't able to react quick enough to get back, and that's something we'll have to iron out, and I'm sure that Enzo is already trying to do ahead of the new season. And obviously, not only did we concede chances from this, but as I said with Thuram, we conceded off of the back of this commitment of players forward, with Marcus Thuram able to lash in a left-footed effort from outside the box after the first water break of the game in the opening half. That was just one instance in an otherwise pretty comfortable performance for us. We were able to keep the ball much better and were creating chances. Our finishing wasn't the greatest though, and in my opinion we kind of let Inter off the hook. Let's talk about the second half though, because we saw a few more changes to the setup in this half, and ultimately one of them allowed us to get back into the game. Firstly, the substitutions were pretty key, though most of the changes were like for like. Obviously Lavia off for Caicedo, KDH came off for Nkunku in this central 10 role, Guiu came off for Jackson, the centre-backs were rotated and Vega came into this left centre-back role. There was one key change that switched up the way that this formation kind of operated, and that was Madueke coming off for Cole Palmer. Obviously, Palmer is an excellent winger, so he's going to improve us when he comes on anyway, but the difference in the way that he and Madueke operate was very evident here. Palmer will always drift inside onto his left foot and try to search for balls in behind or over the top, or across, obviously. Whereas Madueke usually tries to stay wide and try to take on his fullback. The reason this is important is because Palmer doing this, coming central to pick up the ball, allowed Malo Gusto to play as the outside player and be the one going wide and taking on the fullback. And we kind of see this shifting of positions here when this happens. So Caicedo obviously moves a little bit right, Enzo moves a little bit deeper, and Nkunku comes into this left inside 10, and Palmer comes into this right inside 10 where KDH was kind of playing. Now this is important because it suggests that Maresca is prepared to use his squad's versatility, and that he not only sees Palmer as a right winger, but also as a 10 as well. A question that many of us had going into this season, and that is now answered. We will see Palmer play as this inside 10 where he can be really effective. Now this is further interesting when we see the next substitution in the 80th minute, as Gusto eventually comes off for Leslie Ugochukwu, a midfielder. Obviously Leslie eventually scores the equaliser, but that's not the thing I want to focus on here. It's that we see Leslie come into the 6 role where Caicedo was playing, and we see Caicedo go out wide into this overlapping right back role. And the reason why this is so interesting is because it exemplifies what Maresca thinks this position is. It's not a right back role, it's a midfield role, with Palmer able to free up that space. Even Caicedo was able to overlap and provide a threat from a centre mid position. Obviously when we defend, Caicedo would obviously drop into this centre mid position. He would not play up here, but when we are in possession and Palmer comes inside, obviously Caicedo is able to play almost like a right winger or an overlapping right wing back. And regardless of whether this is Caicedo or Gusto playing here, the thing which is really interesting in this specific system now that we are in is that it is really similar to how we were operating at the end of last season under Pochettino, but with the one main difference being that we have Enzo playing deeper where he's better used to actually creative players that can occupy the 10 role and a better control of the game. And that's what I want to finish this video off with. The thing that impressed me the most about this game in particular is that on a decent pitch, instead of one of those American pitches, against the Italian champions, we absolutely dominated them for 90% of the game. We played well against big teams last year, but almost all of those goals were goal fests, where we had little control over the game. Obviously the 4-4 versus City, the 4-3 versus United, plus multiple 4-goal losses that we had. This performance was excellent, and it was proof to me that this way of playing will be able to take us forward, will be able to make us compete against the big teams, and will be able to bring us silverware, as long as the finishing improves, that is. And our next game will be a big test of that, as we are dropped right into the deep end versus Premier League champions Manchester City. The lead-in match preview will be out on Saturday, so look forward to that. But if you can't wait until then, YouTube reckons you'll enjoy one of these 2 videos on screen in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues!